Hello everyone, and welcome to the third webinar of PRINCE2 Primer, a short course presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University. Thank you for joining us. My name is Guy Coward and I'll be your MC today. Your mentor is Brenton Burchmore. Before we begin, a few words on Zoom's webinar function for those who are new to the course. We encourage the asking of questions and the use of chat during our webinars, and there are two ways to do so that we employ. Running along the bottom of the Zoom window, you will find several icons, including Q&A and chat. We ask that you direct all of your course content-related questions to the Q&A section for Brenton to answer, and that you send all administration-type questions to the support team in chat. You can chat with panelists only if you wish, or you can chat to fellow students as well by toggling through the recipient drop-down box once you've opened the chat log. We will have Q&A sessions periodically throughout the webinar. At the end of each session, we'll clear all unanswered questions for ease of use. Diane from IT Masters is here today in a chat and technical support role. She's also responsible for the learn.itmasters.edu.au website, which I'll put up in the chat box later, the link to. That's where you'll find all your other materials needed for the course, pre-recorded lectures, discussion forums and quizzes, and transcripts of Brenton's lectures as well. If you have any questions today or later on, please feel free to contact us using the details on that page. And before handing over to Brenton, please remember that the final webinar of this series is next Wednesday due to the Melbourne Cup public holidays in Victoria instead of Tuesday. So Wednesday, the 8th of November at 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. But for now, please welcome Brenton.
Hello, thank you, Guy. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are around the world. Thanks for tuning in. We are back on track. We are, as I said, week 3. We've got a quick poll just to get everyone back into the mood, get everyone thinking, and put this question up there. Which of these is the most important feature of PRINCE2 in your organization, or which would be the most important feature if you were using PRINCE2? Perhaps the principles themselves, their role in shaping decisions. Maybe it's the themes and their fairly straightforward requirements. Perhaps it's the fact that PRINCE2 offers guidance all the way from the very highest philosophy down to the processes themselves. Or maybe it's the PRINCE2 emphasis on tailoring that's the big thing. Or perhaps the fact that you can use any detailed methodology that you like and still be PRINCE2. Or last option, maybe nothing really stands out. It's all sort of equally valuable for you. So let's see if we get...
That one's proving fairly popular as well.
It has a good balance, actually. We'll share that when we've got a good quorum listed. Let me just answer a question I've spotted there from Zishan. There is a pre-recorded audio that I've put up there which specifically compares PRINCE2 with Agile, with PMBOK, with Scrum, and I have a discussion. It's a 20-minute audio, one of the audio lectures that I put up there specifically about how things compare and contrast. So if you haven't yet got that, and it might have only just gone up there yesterday, do grab hold of that, and that might answer some of the questions you would have about comparing PRINCE2 with others. We're not going to focus on that today. That is included, though, in the topic because we put it as part of the pre-recorded.
And those pre-recorded audio lectures in the study guides for each module, if you haven't found them already. They're quite useful as well. And we've got the results of the poll up. And I suppose the winner is that PRINCE2 offers guidance all the way from the philosophy down to the processes. As second, nothing stands out. So what to make of that, I'm not sure, Brenton.
Well, I guess it's a call out to how comprehensive PRINCE2 can be and how useful it is at all levels of the project discussion. So if all the way from the very highest ideals of how might we go about this, all the way down to, well, this is what we do next. And this is one of the advantages of PRINCE2 is that it's really encompassing in how it helps us in running projects. What we're going to talk about today is how we create a bit of a relationship between PRINCE2 and the organization, how we become PRINCE2, how we get started with PRINCE2. So it's a little less about the dry practical theory of it and a little bit more about how we might make use of it and work with it. So did we share that already, Guy? Could I just close it now?
Yeah, that was shared. Yep.
We'll share. All right. All right. We won't go over this. This is just a reminder. We've just got to put this up each week just to let you know. Yes, there's short courses coming. You know all that already. You know where to find them. Let's talk about project maturity, or rather project management maturity. One of the things that PRINCE2 talks about in the organization is how good are we at running projects? And it raises the question. So it makes us think about how good we are at running projects. And this is really talking about the extent to which the organization, not the project team, but the organization that it's a part of, may have adopted or is supporting or maybe even enforcing particular management methodologies or processes for projects. So what this talks about maturity, it says, well, how serious are we about our project management? And how serious are we as an organization in making sure that our projects run smoothly, run nicely, run really well? And the more mature we are, and the idea of this is that the more serious we are about how we run our projects, the more predictability we're going to be able to create with our project activity. And the point behind the predictability is, you could argue in a simplistic sense that predictability is in fact the very reason for project management activity to begin with. Because the big thing with projects is the uncertainties that they bring. You're going to invest a lot of money in something that, at the start at least, we're not sure exactly how that's going to work out. So the idea behind the very existence of a project methodology is to reduce that uncertainty, to bring about predictability so that the investment can have a degree of certainty in its decision making. And this is often because the people who are making these decisions are doing so with what is essentially someone else's money. And so there needs to be a certain amount of confidence on their part at the executive level to say, well, if we invest 10 million bucks into this, we're going to get value for money out of it. And how do we make sure of that? And this is originally where project management came from. How do we make sure? So this correlation between how mature we are about our approach to project management and how much predictability we can increase and enhance in our projects means that the larger the organization, the more money and the bigger the budgets are, the more there's going to be an interest in wanting to be a little more mature about our project management. The small companies, 10, 20, 50 people can be a lot more fast and loose about it because the consequences are not only they're less dramatic, but they're also easier to fix and correct. So what PRINCE2 has or uses or leans upon is what's called the Portfolio Program Project Management Maturity Model, which is, as you might expect, summarized into an acronym, which is P3M3. And P3M3 does stand for PPP, MMM, 3 Ps, 3 Ms, and that's a pretty easy way to remember it. But P3M3 is a table. It's different levels of project management maturity, and where our organization sits on this is going to determine how its relationship will form with project management. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that at the very bottom, the very first layer, a lot of organizations fall into this sort of category. Now, layer 1 is basically where we say, well, we kind of know that projects are different from business as usual, and that's about it. Projects, yeah, they're different. We treat them differently, and that's about as good as we get with it. Programs, well, they're different, but we don't really have a formula. But yeah, we know they're different. Portfolios, well, that might just be a list somewhere. We might have a list of projects. That list might be on the whiteboard in meeting room 3, and that could be it. But we've got a list, and that makes us level 1. There is level 0, but we're not going to worry about it. So level 1 is there. Level 2 is where you get to the point where you say, okay, yes, projects are different, but they need a project management methodology. We need a process. We need our projects to be projects and have all of the trappings that projects like to have, like processes and methods and all that sort of roles and hierarchy and whatever. It's, the project manager will sort that stuff out. We just, we've got it. We have processes and stuff like that. Now, the next level, and although the acronym actually P3M3 is for the 3 Ms, I like to think of the 3 in the M3 as being level 3, because that's the one that most organizations really should be aiming for. Level 3 is where you actually have a method that is centrally controlled or sanctioned. We do it like this. We are Acme Corporation and we run our projects using these ideas. And it might be that we're PRINCE2 or we're kinda, or we're like this, or we do this, this, and this. Well, whatever it is, we have a recorded method. This is how we go about things. Level 4 is where we say, well, not only do we have methodologies and a centrally controlled one, we care about how well we do. We monitor our performance. The quality of our project management is important to us. So we check it out. We follow up what we do. We are interested in how well we perform. And at level 5, we're not just looking at what we do and fixing it when it goes wrong. We are proactively and intentionally looking for improvements. So at this level, we're doing everything we can to try to do better next time. That's the real proactive. Now, I want to draw your attention to these numbers here. 85%. Now, this is a slightly dated survey. This is back in 2010. But at that point, and this is by consultation in Europe, based in Germany. So this is European companies where PRINCE2 is more common than it is elsewhere. But 85% were only in the level 1 or level 2 category. And only 9% were in level 3. So only 6% were above that. That's the rare few. So my point is, if you're in the 85% category, or your company is, then how do you get up into that 9%? How do you say, well, okay, if I've understood PRINCE2 well enough, and I think PRINCE2 can help us, we can do everything PRINCE2, or PRINCE2 can help us do everything. How do we get into that spot? And that's what we're going to talk a bit about today, how to get there. Now, a quick poll to help shape this, and I hope guys are ready for the poll because he was rushing them in now. What level is your organization at in that model? So level 1, yeah, we kind of know what projects are. Level 2, yeah, we have processes and stuff like that. Level 3 is we honestly, truly, honest to goodness, actually have a centrally managed methodology. Level 4, you know, we gaze thoughtfully at our awesome project management, which we enjoy its quality. Or level 5, we are top notch. We do everything right and we make sure we do everything right. Where do people sit with all of that?
And it looks like a lot of people think that they've got room to grow.
It does. We are heavily weighted towards the bottom of, but that's to be expected. That's what the previous Profios survey showed as well. Hal's pointing out the poll is hard because we seem to be at level 1 with bits from other levels and above. Yeah, look, it's true. I mean, I'm asking you to put a stake in the ground here where a lot of organizations are going to hover between a couple. So you get to choose whether you want to have the optimistic perspective or the pessimistic perspective, which is going to depend how you feel about it, probably. And
maybe we can put in a request to Zoom to have a spectrum option when answering questions.
Yeah, gradient. Yeah, that'd be interesting. All right. Where are we at?
I'll end that one. 85% have already completed it. So I'll end that one. And we've got level 2 generally coming through. I'll share the results. Level 2, we have processes and stuff, 43%, and then about 22-25% for levels 1 and 3, and not much the others.
We have 65% that are in the level 1 or 2 category, which is a little less than Profio said. And it was, as I said, it was 7 years ago, etc., and in a different environment. So it makes sense that you might find a little bit more having something. With 25% now are at level 3, which is great to see. But obviously, as Guy points out, there's a lot of room for improvement. And that's what we're going to talk about. How do we get it in there without necessarily being the big decision maker that says, thou shalt all do it my way? If we're not that person, how do we do it? Now, we've talked...
So Brenton, just before you do go ahead, notice in the chat, actually, this would be a great question for the Q&A section, folks. But there's a question and a discussion about maturity versus tailoring. Ash has asked, does maturity undermine tailoring in the long run?
Does maturity undermine tailoring in the long run? I can see that there's competing forces at work, because a centrally controlled methodology implies that, okay, this is how we do things. And you might think that that would restrict tailoring to say, no, we do it this way. And therefore, tailoring might be more difficult. But this is possibly the case if you're not operating with a PRINCE2 environment. If you are operating in a PRINCE2 environment, if you say, well, we are PRINCE2, therefore we love tailoring because we have to, because we're told to, and because it's embedded in every single thing that PRINCE2 does. So that, in a sense, what you're saying is there's a real risk of that. And to some extent, PRINCE2 has a little bit of an antidote for it, because it's so embedded in what goes on that there's just no choice. If you look at the project management, the body of knowledge, the PMBOK, PMI does talk about tailoring. Out of the 500 and something pages in the the guide to the project management body of knowledge, there is one page on tailoring. I think it's page 28 in the 6th edition. Whereas you look at PRINCE2 and, 20% of the whole thing is about tailoring. So there's possibly an answer to the very problem that you've talked about. And I think the problem is real.
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's good. It's good. It's a good, timely question. All right, principle versus themes. Now, this is stuff we've talked about already. We've spent the last couple of weeks talking about these, and I'm just going to contrast them because it's going to lead us into the next phase of the discussion. So principles, we know that, they're high-level stuff. They give us a bit of guidance. They're not too prescriptive. They're not trying to tell us in detail what to do. They're kind of logical. They're kind of sensible, and it's kind of difficult for people to argue with the principles. It's hard for them to say, hey, no, that's wrong. It's pretty straightforward for us. Themes are a little bit heavier. They are there to make sure that we don't drop anything important, that we don't miss out anything that really we need to keep track of. And so they give us some minimal instructions on the sorts of stuff we need to keep an eye on along the way. And they still give us some freedom to how we go about that is up to us. But they do provide a minimum of what people can agree upon that says, yeah, look, throughout the project, we've kind of got to agree on managing risks. Yes, we've kind of got to manage quality. Yes, we've got to manage our progress. It's hard, once again, to argue with these from a logical perspective. And here lies the beginning of our secret of how we're going to make our organization PRINCE2 compliant by stealth, all sneaky-like, without them even knowing it. PRINCE2 is great for this. So what we need to do in general is we need to get a kind of buy-in to use PRINCE2, but without coming along and saying, hey, I've got this new philosophy, it's called PRINCE2 and we all should do it. And that's going to perhaps work, but more often it's going to create a bit of discussion about, oh, hang on, how big is it? What's going to be different? How are we going to go about that? So we can look at a project that might be coming up, a particular project that we're involved in. And we might look at how would we get that project going as a PRINCE2 project. Now, we know a bit about what it takes to be PRINCE2, and we may not be the only ones that know PRINCE2, but we know enough about it to know what it's going to take. So what we want to do is to perhaps shape the way the organization has its relationship with this project in keeping with how PRINCE2 would want that relationship or would suggest that that relationship should work. Let's say that's our goal. That's how we want to shape things. Now, part of the problem is in the level 1 and level 2 organizations, there's typically this history of, well, that's the project manager will figure that out. Yeah, look, we don't have a centrally managed way of doing everything, and we're going to projects are special, they're important, but the project manager will sort that out. Now, if we are the project manager, or if we have a great deal of influence over the project manager, then we're in the box seat to turn around and say, well, if it's up to us, let's make the whole thing PRINCE2 driven. Let's try and get everyone involved doing this within the PRINCE2 parameters. So then we get given the question, do we begin this discussion if we're trying to shape the relationship that the organization has with project management or with this project? Do we start talking about it from an agile point of view, or do we go straight into talking about it from a Scrum point of view or a PMBOK or PRINCE2? where do we tackle this? Now, what I'm suggesting is we don't start this from a methodology discussion at all. We start this from a logical discussion that is shaped by the methodology. So, big question, can we sneak our way into PRINCE2 with something like this? And the bottom line is, yes, we can. And where we should start is in the areas where there is the least resistance. Now, in my experience in project management, the area that is one of the most unifying, because it is one of the most powerful, is the business case discussion. And the reason I call it unifying is because it is something that everybody is, to some extent, subservient to. So by that I mean, whether you are a member of the delivery team, whether you are one of the users that's going to be using whatever comes out of it, whether you are one of the executives, one of the board, one of the bean counters, the decision makers, one of the technical people, it doesn't matter. Your involvement with this is to serve the purpose of the business case, because the business case serves the purpose of the entity, the organization, this thing that's bigger than all of us. And so that's what gives it its power and its mandate. And it makes that a very powerful rallying cry for us to work with, and as a starting point to get everyone to say, okay, well, let's find common ground. Let's find an understanding and an alignment. The benefits with PRINCE2 is that PRINCE2 does focus on the question of why much more than a lot of other methodologies. So PRINCE2 makes the business case relevant in more ways and to a greater extent. So with PRINCE2, we can start with the discussion of the business case or the reason why we're doing this. Because when we're justifying things in PRINCE2, we're looking at the outcome, the result, the thing at the end. This is what we've talked about in our principles. It then goes beyond that and says, well, it's not just this thing we're going to produce, it's what it's going to do for us. And it's those benefits. That's the thing that's going to end up adding value to the organization as a whole. That's the thing that everyone is going to be expected to be subservient to, that goal, that objective. And if we line up with that, if we line up our role and our function and make it very clearly wedded to that, then we empower the project and we empower the project management as well. So this outcome and the benefits that it brings, it's the most unifying and most powerful force we can have amongst all the stakeholders, which is why we start with it. The secret to that is that the reason for the project's existence in the first place, the reason why we have a project, becomes the reason for all of the things in the project. Why are we here? Well, we're here to create this thing. Let's call it a pink elephant. We're going to build a pink elephant because we need one, because our customers will love it. So, okay, why are we doing these planning stuff? Because we need a pink elephant. That's why. Okay, so why are we doing this organizational structural thing? Oh, because we need the pink elephant. Why are we doing anything at all that you've asked us to do as part of this project? Well, it's because of the pink elephant that we need. So that's harder to argue than say, well, because it says in section 2.3.4 here that that's what we're meant to do next. By tying everything we do back to our reason for existence, we empower it in a different way. So the business case is our starting point for all of these discussions, but it's also what we come back to at the end, because that's the final test. At the very end of the project, when all the dust is settled, then it's the business case that will determine whether or not it's successful or not. So how do we get this started? How do we get the ball rolling? How do we get the party started? I'm going to go through this as a series of discussions, hypothetical discussions, imaginary discussions of what we might go through. And I'm going to take the assumption that we are the project manager. So from the project manager's point of view, when we need to get started, we're going to look for the benefits. These are the rewards that are obtained from a successful project. And these are the benefits that the executive is going to be looking for, to say, okay, we've got these benefits and they're good value for money. We're looking to get started by understanding what the project variables are. So what are the big limits? Do we have a budget, a fixed budget? Do we have a time limit? You know, we have to have our pink elephant done by Christmas. Do we have scope requirements? Are there specific major constraints on our project variables that we need to know about? Are there key stakeholders? Well, we need Fred and Mary involved because, well, Fred and Mary are always involved, but we need Fred and we need Mary for these reasons. Okay, well, we need an executive, and we need the senior user. We need to know who that is, and we need the project manager. Hey, it's me. So who is important here and who matters with any of this? We need to determine a project methodology. By what method are we going to perform these miracles? Is it going to be Scrum? Is it going to be just Prince2? Is it going to be a bit of PMBOK? What are we going to do? We need to know who's going to do it. Who are the poor fools that are going to be stuck with the job of making this thing come to life? Now, these are the factors that not just shape the nature of this project, they shape the relationship with the business. This is a context that we begin to form and the earliest stages of this project. So before we look at how we do that, let me see if I've got any quick questions that I can see here. We've got a question from Cam saying, I've seen both project charter and business case documents as the tool for initiating a project. Does Prince2 recognize both, and how are they different? Business case documents, yes. And project charter, yes. Labels will be different. At the very beginning, before you've even initiated a project, you're still going to have what they call a business case outline, and you're going to have a project brief. That's before you've even initiated the project. Now, these are basically the summarized versions of those two things. And when you then go into the next stage, you have a full business case and you have a full project brief. So yes, those documents are equivalents. Let's see what Paul says. Benefits are often realized after the project has been completed and passed over to the operational crew. Yes, they're often realized at that point, but in most cases, the project shouldn't have commenced unless we are sure or unless we're clear on what benefits we're expecting. Because the benefits is what adds value to the business. The benefits, if you're talking a large organization, that's what's going to add to its share price. So what's going to add intrinsic value to the business is the benefits and how much those benefits are worth to us. So the project shouldn't really kick off unless you have some idea of what those benefits are going to be at the end. But you're right, they're not realized until the end. So it's not until the end that we can see whether or not we got it right. But Prince2 says, well, hang on, no, we're not just going to fire into the air and hope it lands on the right target. We're going to continue to ask that question, because remember the principle of continued business justification and the theme of the business case. We are constantly looking at how we are tracking towards the delivery of those benefits. So that's a question that we're constantly checking and looking at. But yes, we don't necessarily actually get to enjoy them until the very end, but we can't wait for that. So how do we get Prince2 in by stealth? How do we do it all sneaky like? What I'm trying to do here is illustrate how you can use the flexibility of what Prince2 is and the way in which it starts from a philosophical point of view to use it to become the dominant force in project management in your organization. So in these discussions, let's say we're the project manager and we're going to say, well, let's sit down with the stakeholders because we want to know exactly what you want so that we can make sure we can do it. That's an obvious bunch of questions. We need to figure out, tell us exactly what this thing needs to be. Let's pick elephant, how big, made of what, look like this, right? Let's spell it out. So then we need to talk about, well, let's say you have this. What do you think it's going to do for you? What are you expecting to enjoy? The benefits that we've just talked about. What benefits is it going to bring to have? Well, our customers are going to be happier. Okay, let's be clear on that. Let's work that out. Okay, because we need to be clear that if we're going to build something, we want to build the thing that's going to be fit for purpose. So we need to know what the purpose is. No one's going to really argue with that. That's a good thing to discuss. Now, people are going to be happy to discuss it. Yeah, look, let's talk about how you're going to leverage this thing at the end. So if that's what you want, then who is important for that? Who's going to make the decision that what we've built at the end is actually beneficial? Well, that's the senior user. That's this person, right? So who's the executive that controls the big decisions? Well, that's this person. Now, who's this person? Who's that? Who are the key stakeholders? Who are their roles and responsibilities? Who's going to be involved in this project in various ways? Who might be? And if that's who's involved, then who do we escalate to? So what things do we escalate to the executive? What things do we escalate to the senior user? What things does the project manager? What things do we delegate? Let's be clear on, now that we know who the people are, who the roles are, let's be clear on how things go up and down between them. Okay, good. We've got that clear. All right, we've had a discussion about it at least. Now they say, well, look, are there any stages in this project that you think might be a major milestone? A decision that you might need to take to say, okay, well, we need to make a decision of whether or not we continue. Are there any major breakpoints in the delivery of this that you'd want to step back and take stock? Yes, great. Okay, where are they? Here, here, and here. Well, there's our management stages. Got that lined up. So, okay, we've got that information, but look, is there anything that we've done in our previous projects that any of you thought that, we should do better? Anything that, any mistakes we might have made that we want to do better next time? Any lessons learned that we really should be taking into account? Now, if there are, it's got another happy discussion. People are going to say, well, look, I wish we hadn't done this last time and that didn't go very well. And people get into complaint mode, right? And they say, well, this didn't work and that didn't work and let's talk about that. So, well, good, let's capture that and make sure we don't make those mistakes again. Great. Now that we've got all of that clear, we've talked about all this stuff, we've got lots of great answers from everyone, let's just write all that down and clear all that up, because we want everyone on the same page. We want to make sure that everyone is thinking about this the same way, because this project's unique. This project is different. All these answers are unique to this project. Let's capture that, because that's what's going to make this project special and successful. So having gone through a discussion like this, we have gone through all of the PRINCE2 principles. And most of the people in the room, or who we were talking to, they probably don't even know it. But we've just dragged them or snuck them through the principles of PRINCE2. Great. How do we then do themes? Let's do the same thing, talking through themes, and I'll see if we've got any questions on it. Sneaky themes. All right, so we want to make sure, this is the stuff we're going to track on an ongoing basis. So we're having our roundtable discussion with important people. And we say, well, look, we want to make sure that we're keeping track of exactly what this thing is going to be doing at the end, so that we can make sure that it's fit for purpose all the way through. We're going to track that. All right, so we're going to keep a close eye on the business case and the business justification for this all the way through, to make sure that you're going to get what's being paid for, and it's going to still be relevant and useful to you. Great. Okay, we're going to track that. All right, good. Hard to argue with that. We're also going to keep track of who's important. We want to make sure that the right people get kept up to date. All those right people are going to say, yes, thank you very much, I'd like to be kept informed. We're also going to make sure that we're keeping track of who really is important. And whoever feels they're important right then will say, yes, that's good. Make sure you keep track of me. I like that. Great. So if any of that changes or delegations or anything, authority shifting, etc., we'll track that. Good. That's good to track, yes. We're also going to keep track of the quality of what we're delivering. We don't want to, lose sight of it and be delivering something that's not quite good enough. We've got to make sure it's good enough all the way through. We'll agree with that? Yes, we'll agree with that. Of course we are. That's an obvious thing we want to keep track of. Well, things might go wrong with that. Problems might come up, unexpected things might come up. We need to track that. We also might get some opportunities, things that might come out of just the unexpected. We need a way of tracking the unexpected naturally. Yes, of course we do. Well, okay, let's do that. Let's make sure we're doing that. And if the unexpected does happen, be it good or bad, we need a way to manage changes, right? We've got to track how we change things in this. Yes, we do. We need to manage changes. Someone says, you mean change control processes? Yes, we can call it that. That's a great name for it. Thanks. Call it that, change control processes. We're going to manage change all the way through. Naturally, of course, that means we're going to have to track our progress. There'll be management reports. We love them, don't we? Especially management. You love collecting spreadsheets that we can then say, look at that pretty spreadsheet. So we're going to do those. The right ones, the ones you need. Yeah, we'll talk about those details later. But there'll be progress tracking. We will track our progress. Now, to do all of this, now that we've agreed on all of this, we're gonna track all this sort of stuff on an ongoing basis. Well, we're going to plan how we're going to do that. I'm going to keep those plans up to date. Because you all heard that saying, right? Sun Tzu, Art of War, says, no plan survives contact with the enemy. I think it was him. But we all have heard that before, and we all agree with that. It sounds logical. So, yep, right, we'll keep our plans up to date. So now we have, in fact, by subterfuge, dragged all of our stakeholders through an acceptance and an understanding and agreement that we're actually going to use all of these PRINCE2 themes. So now we've covered the principles, and now we've covered the themes. We're already halfway PRINCE2, and most of the people still don't even know it. Awesome. Maybe check and see if there's any great questions. Question, what about the accountability of each role? Absolutely. You might not go into full detail yet because we don't yet have a project. This is in the this is the startup phase of the project. So not all of the accountabilities might be worked out, and that's okay. But whatever accountabilities you do have, or that you can agree upon, or that you can discuss, great. Put them in, lock them down. The ones you haven't yet, by the end of the initiation process, you need to have that finished. So what am I saying? There's startup and there's initiation. Startup, which we're going to talk about now, and what is the purpose of startup, happens before initiation. Startup is the thing that decides whether or not you're going to initiate. So startup is sort of like, should we do this or not? Drew was saying, so does it mean that before learning PRINCE2, we need to learn negotiating and selling skills to sell the idea? Not a bad thing, but you don't need it. What we're trying to do is to have a purely project management discussion. So really, in a sense, I'm saying that, no, you don't need to sell the idea that you're doing this with PRINCE2, because quite frankly, if you don't have to, you don't even mention it. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be sneaky about this. If you don't have to be sneaky, if you turn around and say, let's do all this PRINCE2 and everyone cheers, well, then obviously it's going to be pretty easy from that point onwards. I'm assuming that's not the case. Otherwise, we wouldn't need to have this kind of discussion. So let's say it's not that easy. Do you need to sell the idea? No, you need to nearly talk about the benefits or the point behind the questions that you're asking. And that's the idea of taking this sneaky approach. We just ask the questions that make sense. But we ask all the questions that PRINCE2 wants us to ask. And we get all the answers because they're hard to argue with. So yeah, if you have selling skills, go ahead and sell the idea. But if you don't, just be a project manager and do this from a project management perspective. As you're saying, traditionally projects report to the steering committees. Are they the same as a project board in PRINCE2? Largely. Steering committees, if you look at a steering committee from a governance point of view, from a PMBOK point of view, they're associated with managing the methodology of how things get done. In PRINCE2, the project board, you could say, makes a broader range of decisions. It's a final approval step of a lot of what goes on. But ultimately in PRINCE2, you still have the single individual, which is the executive, who is accountable. And the project board helps with a lot of the decision making, and it helps with how that works. But ultimately, you're going to have one person, a single human being responsible for it, and that's the executive. So the executive has a very deep and relationship with the project board. They're usually in the project board. They often lead the project board, and that's where that difference comes about. Steering committees, often much the same, often used the same. But some steering committees tend to be a little bit hands-off on the deliverables and a little bit more interested in governance and making sure that things are done the right way, on the assumption that if they're done the right way, then hopefully, probably, the right result will magically pop out at the other end. Some steering committees might be like that. Mind you, some project boards are like that too. So, but PRINCE2 says, no, we want to be more hands-on than that if we can. So, purpose of the startup process. Well, it's to make sure that we've got the information in place to know whether or not we have a viable and worthwhile project or not. Now, a lot of these discussions that we've been through, the stuff that the sneaky principles and the sneaky themes, we might have yielded information out of that says, this is a dead duck. This isn't going to happen. And good to know. It's glad we got that sorted out. Let's move on. But if it is going to happen, then we are clear and we are in alignment. We're in common agreement on this fact. So this point, this startup, is as much about should we do it as it is about how we do it. So first is the should we, and then, okay, we probably should. So if we should, how should we? It's kind of meant to prevent all those bad ideas from becoming projects. I mean, many of us, I certainly have been in a situation where someone talks about it as a proposal or a plan or an idea, and everyone's very judgmental towards it. And as soon as it gets talked about as a project, the judging stops and the complaining starts. Because everyone seems to think, well, it's been rubber stamped, right? It's a project now. It's going to happen. I can't stop it. I should judge. I'm just going to complain about it. But there's this acceptance. There's this subconscious element of saying, oh, we've got a project now, so well, I guess we've got to do this thing. And that mentality it provides a lubricant on the journey of this project to go from somebody's great idea to, okay, now we're doing this. Now we've got to find the money for it. Now we've got to find a project team, and now we've got to make it happen. And oh God, this is a terrible idea. Why do we even do this? That's what happens. We've seen it. We've been through it. Some of us have lived it. And this process is meant to try and avoid that or reduce it. But if we do go ahead, it's meant to give us at least the minimum of what we need to be able to initiate a project. So it's about deciding if. It's not about initiating a project where we do all of the tailoring and get everything lined up. That's a full phase. That's a major stage of work. We're not at that stage yet in this discussion. So what are the objectives? We're doing this startup thing. What are we meant to get out of this? What are we meant to have as objectives? Well, we need to have a business justification. And this is where we go back to the discussion, the question we just had. We have an outline business case. It's the short version. It's a summary. It's kind of like this. Doesn't need to have all the meat on the bones, but it needs to have enough for us to understand its intention. Enough to understand, should we go to the next step? We also need to have all the necessary authorities. There's no point in us going to the next step of initiating a project if it hasn't been authorized, if we don't have people who can make the decision. You need to have an executive. You need to have a project manager. You need to have a senior user. Without the senior user, you don't know whether or not what you're doing is actually worth it. Without the project manager, you're not going to have things actually tracked and happening. Without the executive, you're not going to get the big decisions made. You also, as an objective, need to get the level of information that you need to be clear on what this project is. Now, okay, we've called it a pink elephant. How big? How big is it? Well, it's this big. Made of what? Rubber. Well, okay. Pink elephants are meant to be made of rubber, apparently. Okay, great. It's made of rubber. It's pink elephants made of rubber. There's more to it than that. We're going to spell that out, and we're going to call it a project brief. It's the limited version. It's the short version. It might have things missing. It might have some assumptions, but we'll list those assumptions. We'll say, okay, assuming this, this, and this, the qualifiers, they're there in black or white. We can say, okay, these are the things we haven't quite ironed out yet. But we can make enough assumptions to say, okay, now we need to go to the next stage of ironing those out. Because the assumptions that we worked with were useful enough for us to decide that we should go and iron them out. And we also, as an objective, need to decide kind of how we're going to approach this. Should we scrum it, block it, prince it, bits of each of the other? How are we going to go about this? Have a discussion, compare, look at a way, and determine pretty much how we would. We'd probably do it this way. Great, good to clarify that. And we work out who would we get involved to do the actual initiation. Let's say, okay, if we went ahead and if this got funded, who would we need to second to get this off the ground? Well, we need all of Fred's team, and we need all of Mary's team, and we need this, and we need that, and all this sort of stuff. Okay, great. So we've got those ironed out. We know who those people are going to be. So that if the initiation gets approved, then we know and they know what's going to happen next and who's going to do it. The significant roles. This is going back to the question we just had. And then, assuming we've got this far, we're pretty close now to actually agreeing to initiate a project. We can now work out an initiation plan. Plan the activities that would occur in the project initiation. So the project initiation is a stage plan. It's the first stage. Remember when we talked about stages, you have the initiation and then you have the multiple management phases, which are the delivery phases. But the initiation stage is this unique stage where everything gets decided. and clarified and worked out. And our objective in the startup is to say, well, what would we do during that? How would we do that? Basically, the point is we don't waste time on initiating a project, and initiation is a lot of work and effort. We don't do that based on unsound assumptions, such as how much money do we really have? How big should this elephant be, really, etc. So here it is. Here's this context, this idea as an overview. Okay, so you've got the top left, the project mandate. Someone says, wouldn't it be great if we had a project to build a pink elephant? And that could come from the highest levels of the corporation. It could come from program management at a higher level. It could come from the customer initiating this idea. Someone says, wouldn't this be great? Okay, so what do we do now? Well, first of all, you need an executive and a project manager. The executive is where the buck stops. The project manager is the person who figures out everything else below that. So the executive and the project manager need to be appointed. And those two people need to get together and say, okay, well, before we do anything, let's just make sure we're not doing the wrong thing that we did last time. Let's check our lessons learned first. Because the very first thing we do might have been the very same mistake we made last time. So the first thing we do is check for any lessons learned from last time. Meanwhile, whoever it was that kicked off the mandate, they're trying to put a bit more flesh on the bones of what this idea is. So they're outlining a business case. They're trying to justify it and explain it and put a little bit of detail around that. So with our lessons learned, we then say, okay, so now we need to determine and appoint a project management team. And we need to create a project brief of how this project will work, make some high-level decisions about the project. And all of that is taking into account the lessons learned, as is hopefully the business case that our corporate executives are also doing. And then if all that comes together, the project team and the project decisions that we've made, they feed into a planning stage to plan the actual initiation, which then obviously relies upon the business case to know what it is we're meant to be initiating. And if all that comes together, then we go to actually formally request to initiate a project where we look for funding, real funding, to get it started. And that's ultimately going to lead on to the directing of the project. So what are the startup actions? Appoint the executive project manager, capture previous lessons learned, design and appoint project management team, prepare the outline business case, select a project approach, create a project brief, plan the initiation stage. That's all that PRINCE2 requires of us in a startup to get the ball rolling. Now, when it comes to tailoring, things might go a little bit differently. Sometimes in the project brief, it might be a big document, small document. Some of the money might be estimates. Some of the benefits might be loosely defined. That's something we'll tailor. The stage plan will depend upon its complexity. It could just be a simple list of accountabilities in the stage plan. It might exist wholly within whatever software we use for project management. It might not be a published report. The roles we might use, the roles we used last time, the roles we have in the organization. We might have some roles that are temporarily assigned. That's okay. For really simple projects, this whole thing might be in a 1-hour meeting, all done and dusted. But the questions still need to be answered. And if we're going to go with an agile approach, well, there's a few more things that we might need to do differently. How would we manage some of these themes in an agile approach? Some of that would be a little different, and we need to talk about it up front. And if it's within a program, some of these things might be influenced by the parent program that says, well, in this program, all the projects need to have these things or work this way. Or there's something that might be prescribed by the program down to all of its projects. That might be something we need to take into account. So this is where how we start up the project might need to be tailored. Now, just as we decided to take all of our other stakeholders through sneaky principles and sneaky themes, I just took you through a sneaky process. We just went through a complete PRINCE2 process, sneaky-like, stealthily. And some of you probably didn't even realize it.
How dare you?
So that's the beauty of this idea. That's the beauty of this saying, well, we're just going to go with stuff that makes sense. and we're going to use the PRINCE2 stuff that makes sense. And not everyone needs to know how or why. We do. And through that, we can make our organization PRINCE2. Let's see if there's any last few questions. Mark saying, presume a program is a series, a collection of projects. Yes, it is. Program is a collection of projects that relate to each other, that have some relevance to each other. A portfolio is a list of projects or programs that may or may not all interact with each other. Indy's saying, who manages communications in the project? Project manager, change manager, or is there no communication? It's the project manager. Project manager is responsible for making sure that the various stakeholders and they're all stakeholders, but the various people that need to know what's going on, they know what's going on. So ultimately the buck for that will stop with the project manager, because communications is a functional tool. Communications is a functional and practical thing that needs to happen for the success of the project. And that's going to fall on the project manager to make sure that happens.
Just before you got to that tailoring slide, Brenton, an anonymous attendee asked, doesn't appointing the PM team seem a bit too hasty if the project hasn't been approved yet? And I was saying that perhaps that tailoring slide might answer that question. It's not necessarily set in stone. That it is then sort of further developed after that startup phase. Would that be accurate?
Yes, and it is a question of who would you use? In the startup phase, that's the context. Who would you use? So we'd use Fred, we use Mary. Well, that's not going to work because Fred's going away for 6 months leave, and Mary's about to be promoted into some other job. Oh, glad we asked. Who else would we use instead? Okay, well, we could use this and these people. Oh no, they've got no idea. Let's answer that problem before we turn around and say, hey, Fred, Mary, you've got a new project. And they say, no, we don't. That's why we have those sorts of discussions. Who would we use? And even they might not know, they might not be part of it. Some of them might, some of them might not. But you've got to figure out those theoretical questions at the stage before you've gone ahead and committed to it, because you've got to test whether or not it's even viable. Because
Thanks.
All right, do we have time for this last poll?
Yeah, we'll do that. I'll launch it now. Look at that, folks. We'll almost fit within the lunch hour. Okay. How much easier or harder do you believe it might be to properly kick off a PRINCE2 project within your own organization? And for those listening later in the week, much easier. This seems to make things straightforward. A little easier, but only by degrees. Nothing easier nor harder than how it is done now. A bit harder. We tend to find easier methods. Or definitely hard. I am not sure we can pull this off without a lot of effort. And again, a fairly dominant result, certainly towards the more easier or a little easier.
Yeah, it's leaning towards the easier, which is great to see. It's good to see that people are able to see a connection between their organization and how PRINCE2 is structured, and they can perhaps see ways that they can make PRINCE2 help them. And find positives out of it, which is great. It's good to see. So that's an encouraging sign, and hopefully it's encouraging everyone else who might feel that each organization is different, and for some people their organization will make it harder for them, without doubt. But hopefully they can find some encouragement that there's a chance that things might go better than they think.
Yes, and over 80% at least think it won't make it harder. So that's nice. I'll share that one. There we go.
All right. So let's summarize what we've covered today. Getting started in PRINCE2 is about asking all the right questions, and PRINCE2 helps us define what those questions are. And having this logical, sensible approach can help define a pretty good and clear relationship between the organization as a whole and its projects and its project people and its project activity. And how the business looks at PRINCE2 can help determine how it views its projects. So if the organization says, well, yeah, PRINCE2 is not too difficult, mostly sensible, and not too restrictive, then it creates a possibility for a healthier relationship between the organization and its projects as well. because it can see that the projects are, sensible, logical, not too constrained, but on the right track. And the processes, as we've just discovered, are pretty simple, they're flexible, and they're likely conceptual in nature. We'll go through the processes in a lot more detail next week. We'll go through the whole concept of what is a process, and we'll pick another one, a more complex one, and we'll go through that as an example in a little more detail. Okay, forum activity. Here's what we'd like to chat about in the forums this week. So compare and contrast how any particular project that you would know about was started and how it might have started if it was PRINCE2. So if it's not, how would it have been different had it happened in the way PRINCE2 should have done it? Or maybe discuss an aspect of how that project of yours started and how that startup issue affected project success in the end, either good or bad. Or, of course, comment on someone else's discussion to inform and elaborate on the discussion. One last question we've got come in during the initiation. What happens if all the resources in the organization is busy? It takes time to hire consultants, etc. So how do we start a project without resources and just with an executive and a project management? So that's a good point. If you're in a situation during startup and you say, well, who would we use? Well, we'd use these resources. Well, they're not available. Okay, so if the answer to the question is we don't have the resources or we don't have them right now, and we're going to need to bring them in, hire them from scratch, then that's going to change what our initiation needs to do and be and have. And that is one of the reasons why you asked that question during startup. So that during the initiation, you say, right, we're going to have to hire 20 people or 3 or whatever the number is. And who do we need and why do we need them? And how long is that going to take? That's something you need to know before the initiation begins, so that when you go cap in hand, or somebody does, to get the budget for this, you say, well, yeah, we're going to have to hire a bunch of people and it's going to take time and that's going to affect our schedule and it's going to affect this and it's going to affect that. And we know all that because we asked the right questions. Just a reminder, what do you need to do for the certificate of completion? Do the weekly activities, post something in the forums about it. Do the weekly 5-question quiz, and there will be still the final quiz at the end. And you don't have to keep coming to these. You just watch the recordings. Next week, we're going to talk about processes. Well, some of them anyway. We're going to look at what is in a process. We're going to look at how it's constructed. And we're going to look at how you might apply those in reality. And we'll do a quick summary on all the things we've covered over the last 4 weeks. One last question from someone says, if the project manager wants to go PRINCE2, but the organization can't change their ways, is PRINCE2 still viable? Well, it depends how much freedom that project manager has. If the organization has a centrally controlled methodology and it isn't PRINCE2 and it's not going to be PRINCE2, then you're somewhat limited into how much you can do and use PRINCE2, because you're not going to get as much cooperation with these questions and answers that you need. But it doesn't mean you can't use some of it. There's going to be elements of it that you as the project manager can implement and can adopt. Even though you won't necessarily have all of the organizational structure around you, you won't have all of the principles in place, you won't have some of the themes, but there's still a lot of it you could do within the constraints of what you have power over. But I'm not advocating that you should totally buck the system. If the company says, no, we don't want to go that way, that you force them to do it in a detrimental way. You only want to use the bits of PRINCE2 that are going to add value to what you're doing. You don't want to make it a battleground. Even if you think PRINCE2 might win, it's still David versus Goliath, and some fights aren't worth fighting. So yeah, there's a degree of diplomacy in all of that. All right, folks, we have hit the hour.
Well done, Brenton. Good timing.
Indeed. So that's all we have for today. I will wrap up there. We will be back again, as Guy has mentioned. Just a reminder, it's the day after. It's the Wednesday. It's the Wednesday. Who has a holiday for horse races? Oh, it's a crazy idea. I don't know.
Yeah, pretty good.
I'm not even sure we have horse races here. No, we do have horse races in Singapore. I'm sure we do. There's a race course somewhere. Don't have a lot of space for that sort of stuff here. But Anyway, hopefully everyone found that very useful and rewarding. And thanks for the comments and the questions along the way. And I look forward to chatting with you all again next week on the Wednesday. Until then, thank you and good night.